Good afternoon, folks. Thank you so much for deigning to join us during the 2:30 slump. Really appreciate you all being here, and I'm excited for this panel because I think we will be able to share some things that are maybe a lot more actionable and things that you can take away to go home to your different districts and classrooms. My name is Marisa Mission. I am a senior analyst at Bellwether. If you are not familiar with us, I like to say that we operate at the intersection of policy, research, and practice. And recently, we published a series called Built for Learning, which includes 5 different case studies on different EdTech tools that are AI-powered. And we highlighted these tools because we thought they were really thoughtful in how they were designing AI to preserve productive struggle. We all know that AI tools, and really most of technology, makes things easier. But when it comes to learning, things don't need to be easier. Sometimes they actually need to be harder, right? Productive struggle, zone of proximal development, whatever the term is that you want to call it, that is where students actually do the hard work of learning. So today we have this panel of 4 wonderful people. I will let them introduce themselves to really dig into this idea of where do we use AI specifically to help boost students' learning in ways that protect and preserve productive struggle rather than obliterating it. Meghan, do you want to kick us off with introductions?
Hi, thanks so much for having me on this panel. I'm Meghan McCormick. I'm the Senior Research and Impact Officer at Overdeck Family Foundation, where I lead all of our investments in research and evidence building. And we do a lot of investments in the tutoring space. This is very relevant.
Let's keep going.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Akhtar. I am the Managing Director of Strategic Partnerships at Quill.org. It is an EdTech nonprofit that offers a writing platform that's powered by AI.
Hi, everyone. Jennie Dougherty. I work at KIPP Public Schools, Northern California, where I lead AI strategy across 22 schools.
Hi, everyone. I'm Teryn Thomas, CEO and founder of EdLight. And we really focus on leveraging handwritten student work on paper to actually be able to provide misconceptions analysis to teachers so that they can make instructional moves in the moment.
Awesome. And guys, I'm really excited about this panel, partially because if you've noticed, we've got a variety of perspectives here, from research and funding to practitioners to EdTech developers, folks who are former teachers. And so I think the wide range of perspectives here is really what is going to make this session awesome. So let's get right into it. What does it mean to you and your organization to use AI in a way that promotes productive struggle? Let's start with Jennie, and then Sarah, Teryn, and Meghan.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, using AI in a way that promotes productive struggle really starts when we're vetting a tool and looking at it really closely and empowering our teacher leaders to run micropilots where they're trained to really evaluate the tool against what we call our Hippocratic Oath framework, and really looking for evidence that it is actually promoting these instructional strategies that we would otherwise use without the product in the room. But beyond the product itself, we're also looking for those same teachers to be cultivating the practices that support students to engage continuously in that productive struggle. So when the product does show up, it is effective, then how do you ensure that that student doesn't just crash out, as they say, or become overwhelmed? How do you enable them to also remain engaged? And that's really the practitioner's specialty and something that we look and help them support their growth in.
Great. With Quill, Quill is really focused on having students write to learn and learn to write. And they do that through a Socratic dialogue with the EdTech platform. We are heavily inspired, actually, you mentioned the Hippocratic Oath, from the medical field, and like that you would trust AI medical test results because they have a proven 99.9% accuracy. And in education, we don't even measure sometimes the accuracy. And so Quill's been really inspired to start measuring productive struggle in our sessions with students, as well as the efficacy of the feedback that the AI tool is giving. We do this by making sure that students do stay in that zone of proximal development, and we measure it by assessing whether what they type into the prompt or to the feedback they receive, whether or not that is showing that they are trying and that they're engaging and that their responses are improving over time. In a recent study we had with a specific fish tank learning integration, 97% productive struggle. Only 4 out of 153 sessions were unproductive, which is defined by like a student writing IDK, right? And then what happens in some AI platforms is when you do that, it'll just keep responding and you'll get stuck in a loop. And we cut that loop off at 5 attempts. So we're really trying to harness the power of AI. And I'll talk later about how we program it and get it to do this. But we're really trying to get the students to make growth in a limited window of time.
I think it's the time piece that you're making me think a lot about, and just how uncomfortable it is when you're a teacher sitting in front of a group of kids and they don't yet have mastery of the content, right? And how uncomfortable it is and how much time you have to sit in there and just be like, I'm not going to lead the witness. I'm just going to sit here and let you guys struggle. And I think that's really at the core of why EdLight was founded. So before I founded EdLight, I was a chief schools officer for a group of schools actually in Denver. And I started conducting these empathy interviews to be like, okay, what's going on in classes? Like, why are we not able to like see the shift that I think we've been really investing in terms of our resources and our time, yet with the state assessment scores? And classroom after classroom, I heard teachers say, well, I taught it. And I was like, okay, what am I learning from this? And basically I was like, oh, like we're teaching it, but we have no real way of measuring whether or not kids are learning it that aren't these like large later state assessments that are gonna then give us the outcomes like 6 to 10 months later, you're now with another cohort of kids. And so for me, the productive struggle at EdLight is really in allowing a student a couple of things. One, they can submit their questions on their paper as many times as they want because we believe that the mistakes are actually going to contribute to your learning. The second is we really want to see all of that work on paper. So I know you guys remember being in class and being like, I'm going to write every single part because if I just get half a point, my mom or my parent will be really proud of me. And so we really want to see like all of that thinking down on paper. And I think the third way is by helping kids to learn how to ask for help. I think one of the reasons why kids don't necessarily take risks to ask for help, or at least they didn't in my classroom, was they didn't always know how to ask that question. And so how do we actually use their student work to help them to realize, hey, what are the questions you want to ask a peer next to you or your teacher or later in small group? And so we're often really helping kids by redirecting them back to coming up with the question of where they actually are stuck.
I feel like I'm going to double down on the measurement theme as a research person. So at Overdeck Foundation, we are making investments in solutions to support kids' learning, trying to drive through our North Star of math and reading achievement. And I think we feel like there's a good evidence base on the things that can move those outcomes. The challenge is they're really hard to scale, and they're really hard to scale with fidelity so that you can maintain the impacts that you see on a small, like us in a small study. And so we're really excited about the opportunity that AI presents to try to address that huge kind of scalability and cost question. The challenge for us is really when we're funding research on tools or funding just like formative research in the field, is figuring out like what do the specifications of the design need to look like so that they align with the decades of research that we have on learning science. Kids need to be actively engaged. They need to be appropriately scaffolded. They need to have the initial kind of like wins that motivate them to continue moving. And so when we're funding research, not just on like products that we're investing in, but also just in the field to help provide the information that product developers need to make better decisions. We're kind of looking for alignment with learning science. And critically, we're trying to get a better understanding of like, what outcomes did this actually move? Did it move something that's like so closely aligned with the kids' interaction in that session? Or did it actually demonstrate that it is improving some indicator of understanding or knowledge that we know is more predictive of other broader outcomes? So we're thinking a lot about how are like measures embedded in these sessions so that we can really also understand whether they're moving those outcomes in real time and in the long term as well, as some other folks were saying.
Thank you all. And something that I'm hearing from both their answers and our research, and I'll name for the audience, is that not a lot of this is brand new, right? Things like measurement, feedback, These are concepts that definitely already exist in education, right? And where AI is coming in actually is accelerating, is scaling. And so when it comes to protecting productive struggle, we kind of already know how to do it. We just have to implement it. And so I'm going to move into a question for our developers, Sarah and Teryn. High-impact tutoring depends on students actively thinking through problems. That's that productive struggle we're talking about. And your tools are both designed to preserve that. Can you walk us through one specific design choice that you or your organization made to protect effortful engagement during a tutoring session, and what implications that might have had for the rest of the product?
Sure. So one specific choice we've made in terms of getting students to really be able to engage with the feedback they're getting on Quill is we have to do what we call like a knowledge-rich approach to using AI, which means like heavily programming, customizing, and tailoring the experience that students will have. So what that leads to is that 97% rate of productive struggle, because the feedback that the students are getting is so precise and accurate and like effective feedback. But the only way to do that is to put a lot of controls in place. So we have, for example, if you just rely on an LLM to answer a question about a novel, it's not really going to know what grade you're in and like what level of complexity you're supposed to understand certain concepts. But this knowledge-rich AI approach means that we actually put in up to 5,000 words to prompt for each activity that we offer. We put in 50 to 100 sample student responses, and then the LLM is just pattern matching that to the appropriate feedback that a real teacher has written. And then we test it with 600 teachers in our advisory council before we launch anything. So that's the design choice, is that it's like highly protected, highly curated experience, which leads to this great level of accuracy. But the implication is that it actually doesn't scale as fast as you would imagine an AI tool could, because we can't just like throw any text in there. A teacher can't say, I'm going to do a unit about XYZ and post this thing about spiders, and then all of a sudden they can use Quill. It has to be programmed in that way that I described. So we can scale and we can reach a lot of students, but we have to do it in this very like responsible approach.
And what I'm hearing too is that it protects high quality with regards to curriculum and instructional materials too. Cool. Teryn?
Yeah, I will talk about curriculum all day. So that was a perfect segue. Thank you so much, Marisa. So I would say when I think about the design choices that we made, before a student is able to submit any work into EdLight, there's a little pop-up based off of some work that we did with the Math Narrative Project, where it's focused on how are you feeling? Like, how did you feel about today's lesson? Because the feedback you're going to get as a student, if you are frustrated, is very different than how you're going to get feedback if you're like, I'm feeling good, like, let me go, challenge me on. And so I would say that's probably one of our more specific design choices, is just asking students before they even start to submit their work, like, where are you coming in today? And then we similarly do a process that's pretty much mirrors that with teachers, where we ask them like, hey, based off of the last couple of lessons, before you move into this next exit ticket for today, how are you feeling like your kids are doing? And then that also allows us to make sure that the misconceptions and the analysis that we're giving to teachers on that live dashboard creates an opportunity for the teacher to also be in a place where they are like, okay, yes, I'm picking up what you're putting down. And so just looking at for those little moments where you're adding in the like feelings, the emotions, the things that like can make or break feedback when you're in the classroom.
Yeah, that is super interesting. And one thing that Bellwether actually found in our research on productive struggle is when you break cognitive science down into like overly simple elements, but metacognition is one of them. And knowing if you are ready to accept feedback is so big, right? And then folks also link that to motivation and readiness to learn and growth mindset. And so that is a really great specific example. Jennie, we'd love to also hear from you about how you're seeing these EdTech tools and use related to productive struggle play out in classrooms as a practitioner. What other design decisions maybe have you seen work well in making sure students aren't doing that cognitive offloading?
Yeah, so I love this question. I love everything that's been said. I'm going to actually talk about one that did not work well.
Yeah, go
because
for it.
again, I'm
Yes.
here to talk about what happened in the
Learnings
classroom.
are learnings.
And so a lot of these tutoring programs are also building in Teryn, as you said, opportunities for the teacher to see information based on the data about a common high leverage misconception, which then they can orchestrate a discussion around. And so, first of all, this is like sexiest feature of the year by far. And I was so excited about it. It was mind-blowing to imagine a brand new teacher being able to leverage a misconception when usually it takes them a full year to even begin to start imagining identifying one correctly, let alone addressing it. And so we, when we're doing these implementations in a micropilot, we only give the resource to our best teachers. So these are teachers that I had seen repeatedly unpack a misconception and really, really lead an authentic inquiry-based discussion where the students were doing the heavy lifting. So this is not cognitive offloading. This is really having them take charge. And so I'm in the room and I'm watching the teacher and they hit the misconception button and it's projected up, and then silence, very unexpected silence. And what crossed my mind was, damn, we took away the teacher's think time. Because while, oh, amazing, they don't have to go pacing back and forth around the room, identifying the misconception, what we forgot, what was unspoken, is that's also their think time, where they're rehearsing in their mind how they're going to address this with the student. And so we worked with the software provider, and they've redesigned it so now it says, pause, read the misconception, then project it to students. And we built it into our observation tool as well, but it was just one of those moments where it was like, thank God there's someone in the room watching this happen, because otherwise you wouldn't even know. Maybe it was just the teacher had a bad day, or you could sort of, blame it on them. But really it was, we took away their think time, and we did it with the best of intentions. But as we're embarking this new era of AI native software, we really need to be intentional about making sure that we're really closely observing how it's changing things, both for good and sometimes not so good.
That's a great example and a good reminder for all of us that it's not just about students' cognitive abilities that we're protecting, but also our teachers, especially our newer and our more experienced teachers. That's a great segue, actually, Meghan. We'd love to talk about the evidence base for AI tutoring tools. We've got lots of researchers here that are really building that evidence base. But from a funder and researcher perspective, what should people in this room realistically expect tools to be demonstrating at this stage? We've got a lot of district practitioners in the room. What's a reasonable bar of evidence, and what would give you pause?
I think what gives me pause is when the evidence base is like grossly overstated to what's actually realistically going to happen. I think we should be not necessarily like skeptical of AI tutor tools, but I don't think we should be automatically assuming that they're going to be extremely effective in the current state, if not like so much more effective than like human tutors. I think we should just go into the assumption of like doing this work that human tutors are the best. Like a one-on-one human tutor is going to be like the best you're probably going to do, especially like a really highly trained human tutor. And that's kind of what we know, again, from like decades of learning science about how kids learn. They need humans to interact with them, to motivate them, to engage them, to get them excited. I just made like a video for teacher appreciation for my son's second grade class, and every single kid in the video said the thing they loved most about the teacher was the stories she brings, how funny she is, how much she like makes learning fun. So like all those things, especially if you're thinking about younger students especially, those are always going to be kind of the assumption that we're going into the work with. So I'm just like very skeptical when people are kind of making claims about the impact of these potential tools. Again, as I said before, what's exciting about them, though, is that we do know that if we could offer that experience to every single kid in America, we could have some huge effects. But we obviously can't do that due to like scale, cost limitations. And so what's exciting is to think about how these tools can mimic human interactions and how we can start generating a better evidence base using like the metadata within the actual platforms. That's super exciting to me, metadata. How we could leverage that to really understand like which specific interactions are most effective for boosting learning, what types of sessions, what tutor features kind of are most strongly associated with helping kids develop learning and understanding. And I think like in the research, we're starting off small, right? Really testing these things, doing like feasibility tests, doing some A/B tests to understand the features that we can build on each other that boost learning. And it's exciting to think about how those could be integrated into existing classrooms in the most effective way that kind of maximizes kids' engagement with other humans and their human teacher, but then gets this like supplemental support that's, again, something that can be more personalized, more scalable, and can be accessible to a much broader range of kids than we can do with the current human tutoring models.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think what you laid out just now is like a great vision for where we should be taking a lot of our research and where we want to see the field moving. So I'm going to bring it back to our developers. Given how fast AI is advancing, what does it take for you all to be able to generate credible evidence of impact while you're still also iterating on the product?
It's a great question, and we do have plans and hopes and dreams of having a full RCT at some point, but those take a while to put together and to get the funding for and the participants for, and then by the time you do that, to your point, like the technology might have changed, right? So we're really thinking at Quill about pre-RCT evaluation. We have a correlational study right now with Accelerate, that's leading to that 97% of productive struggle result that I was explaining. We also have a cool project right now with Learning Commons where we're building an evaluator. So we're plugging in all of the data, like all the data sets that come from these student and Quill interactions. And then we've worked with a researcher to figure out like what really is effective feedback and defining that by these 5 different criteria. And then a lot of hand scoring and a lot of inputs. But we put in 10,000 pieces of feedback into this evaluator, and then we measured Quill. And so what we found were some really great results, and then like one stark weakness, which was like Quill was great at giving actionable advice and giving effective next step and all these other pieces of the good feedback, but not necessarily honoring the students' strengths when they don't have a correct answer. So now we have something that we can absolutely work on, before we get to the RCT. But I do think that it's really about being willing to define what is good enough, and then also being willing to put your evidence or your data in there and see what the results are. And so we want to open source our algorithms, both we are going to for the evaluator of the feedback, but also the productive struggle, and like want to work with folks who want to plug their stuff in and just see what does it say and how do these things compare. And I think it's a great question for districts to be asking as they're thinking about purchasing as well.
Yeah, one thing I want to name too in what you just said, Sarah, was not only are you evaluating the student impact, which is I think a lot of what we typically think about when we talk about evaluation and research, but you're also evaluating the sheer AI performance. And that in and of itself, it sounds like, takes up a lot of effort and time and resources, right? Awesome. Teryn, why don't you kick us off too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the primary thing that is standing out to me when I'm thinking about how we've been able to conduct research, I think that there's been 3 kind of key points. The first is it really, really matters about dosage. You can make the coolest products, but if no one is using it in their classrooms because it's really, really hard to implement, it does not matter. And I think one of the parts that's been really lucky for us is we've had some strong partners along the way that we're going to insist that you're thinking about that first before you're going out and building all of this other stuff. And so I wish that we could say that we've scaled super fast, super quickly, but it's actually been a nice slow burn. As a result of our partnerships with the Gates Foundation as well as Overdeck, you guys have helped us to actually fund research with partners. And so our first research paper was released maybe about 4 to 5 months ago in partnership with Brown University, where we really focused on what are we able to understand when you have 2.5 million annotations on individual pieces of handwritten student work. What does that mean? What are those misconceptions? What can we make claims on in terms of curriculum that we just didn't previously have data on? And I would say the second thing that we're really looking at after we're talking about dosage is really around those state standardized assessment scores. And so really excited that specifically in Illinois, with a different group of researchers through, I think, JPAL, we were able to identify that we had about 11.8 percentage points higher in classrooms where we had EdLight present versus classrooms in the same building in the same context without EdLight. And so those pieces and those moments have been really important to us. And we're excited because over the next 2 to 3 months, actually partnering with organizations like Jennie's, we're going to be able to build on that across so many more partnerships and really focusing on the research at the core so that we can share that out with the global space and make sure that everybody has access to it.
Awesome. Let's zoom out a little bit and think about the next school year as this one is coming to a close. Each of you has a vision for how AI can genuinely improve tutoring for students. I'd love to ask, what's one enabling condition, whether it's a policy change, a funding shift, research investment, something else entirely? What is that enabling condition that would need to occur for your vision to become a reality at scale? Let's start with Meghan, Teryn, Sarah, and then Jennie.
I think that the enabling condition would have to be really building on what Teryn noted, just the implementation buy-in for the tools so that people will use them, and that they'll be used in the way that we know is going to be effective for boosting learning. So district buy-in, accountability for use, teacher buy-in, clear integration into existing curriculum, and other like tools being used in the classroom. So yeah, just the entire implementation infrastructure of education. No big deal.
Casual. Yeah.
Well, I would ditto because that sounds awesome. I want to live in that world too. I think the only like slight difference for me is probably focusing specifically on co-design and just like how important it is. Like the insights that you're sharing, Jennie, of like I'm in the back of the classroom and I'm seeing the thing. Like those are the moments when I learn most about where EdLight's working and where EdLight's not working. Is like sitting in the back of a teacher's classroom and being like, oh yeah, that's right, because fourth graders don't do what you ask them to do the first time. Cool, got it. And like putting yourself in that position, I think, helps you to remember, like, what are the conditions that need to be true? And I think if there was, like, a magic wand, making sure that every teacher who was using EdLight had, like, 5 seconds to give us some feedback a week and co-design with us would be magical.
Yeah, I would +1 what both of you have said, and add to that, I think another piece of the puzzle is just thinking about how to ensure quality before students become like the guinea pigs for tools that have a big talk but don't actually show results. And so I think, there's been a lot of funding for tools that we've later learned like don't work and have been just like, RIP Conmigo, right? So how do we avoid that mistake again? And so I think one of the shifts would be if, when funding a new tool, if there were like baked into that some of that research and evaluation in the early parts of that development. So not just funding the idea and like where it could go and the vision, but really like the funding is contingent on showing early results and leading indicators.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone said. Meghan, you said something that struck a chord with me, which is, wanting folks to use it the way it's supposed to be used, the way we know that it's going to have the best outcomes. And I'd say we're at the dawn of a new era where we're also figuring that out in real time, to the extent that we had to run our own short cycle study to realize, the company told us 30 minutes. It turns out 91% of our students are only able to meet the fidelity of use metric with 45 minutes, right? Like this kind of a thing where we're doing what the company tells us and it turns out our population, it's a little bit different. And so I think echoing everything that everyone's already said, can we fund like co-design? Can we fund these things in a way that says we're not just betting because we know this is the winner, but instead we're all learning together and making that learning something that can be really statistically significant, which I've learned today is very important, and then also something that can be able to inform the rest of what comes after it.
I think what you all are saying too is in 2026, when it feels like there might be an AI bubble And, we are down the road from VCs that are pouring more money than I will ever see in my lifetime into tools. It is really important for us to slow down and to think about how we're going to measure impact, how we're going to protect productive struggle, how we're going to really make sure that our students and our teachers are not cognitively offloading. I'm going to go a little bit rogue on this question. So fair warning, our panelists did not get this question beforehand. But something that I've been hearing over and over again in the sessions I've been sitting in and we've heard earlier this morning is the importance of making sure that these tools are working not just for the student that's already motivated or the student that has the resources at home to be sitting with an AI tutoring tool, but also for the students who are less privileged, who are under-resourced. And so since I didn't give them time to prep, I'm going to just open this up for anyone to jump in. How are you all thinking about designing AI-powered tools or examining AI-powered tools from the lens of a student who is maybe not the most resourced or coming from a place that is not the most resourced?
I can at least come from the lens of when we're doing micropilots and we're really looking at one classroom with about 100 kids, we are, the Hippocratic Oath framework, we are not looking at average, we are looking at every single subgroup that we care deeply about. We are comparing the growth or the lack thereof. We are not thinking about everyone gets a license immediately. We're really being intentional about it, not just, oh, did it enable overall everyone to get better, but rather, okay, yeah, it helped some students, but look, this group, it really didn't. What are we going to do about them? So just being really intentional from the very beginning so that we're not replicating the 5% problem, but rather, and also that we're designing, really designing with all students in mind from the very start.
Yeah, I would just build on that. So when Quill was designed, part of the vision and mission for it was to help underserved students. So 63% of our users are from Title I schools, and the product was built to serve those kids and filling gaps that they might not get because they don't have that one-on-one in-person tutor necessarily or the smaller class sizes. So that's always been a part of our design, but I think where we were recently pushed, at ASU GSV, we were chatting about our evaluator with Learning Commons, and there were some Johns Hopkins researchers in the room who said, have you parsed the data to see the effectiveness for the different subgroups of MLL students, students with learning differences? And I think our answer at that time was just well, that's really hard to do, but no, let's stop making those excuses and actually figure out how is this serving different populations and get very clear on that so that we can not only use AI to help translate and show visuals and do all the cool things it can do to address those different populations, but also make sure it's working.
I actually have joked that the problem with education is everyone who works in education was a straight A student. And it's
guilty as charged.
We're all designing for ourselves who love learning. So I think this is actually quite a significant problem where they're engaging a broad range of kids in the co-design. And I say this as a person external who's not actually designing tools, who's just kind of sitting on the sidelines researching. But I think that there is a huge challenge there, and then people are surprised that people don't use these tools. We only see effects for the kids, for the most proficient kids actually benefit from them. So I think this is a huge problem. But I do think what's something super exciting about AI is actually the data insights that it provides. So more so than the ability of creating AI tutors, but the fact that it's collecting so much user data in the interface that then you can use AI to actually analyze quite quickly to get insights into okay, my low proficiency kids, they have a completely different user pattern than the high proficiency kids, and that could actually be feeding more into the real-time design and evaluation of the product. So I think that's also actually an exciting opportunity about the AI that could address some of these challenges that you guys are amazingly grappling with in real time, which is incredible.
I think for me, the question hits different. I'm a Black woman in America. I'm a mom of 4. 2 of my kids have IEPs. And so if I'm not building at the margin, no one is. And so it's the only thing that we think about. All of our schools that we serve are Title I. But more importantly than that, in the study that I was referencing earlier, we broke students into 4 levels. And so level 4 is like, I've always been proficient, 3, and it goes all the way down to like below basic on standardized assessments. And for us, I was like, cool, the proficient kids moved, great. What does the actual data say? And that's really where I feel like the extreme pride is, like, I'm building something that would otherwise not be built at the margin. And so I think designing for and at the margin means like pausing, looking at that data, spending more time thinking about what does that mean for our students who are at this level and where they're performing. And so really excited that they had actually 5 times the growth of their peers. And that's like something like, I went home and I was like, hey mom, I do a lot of cool stuff, but this is the thing I want to tell you about. And she's like, oh wow, so it's for kids like Raven. And I was like, yep, it's for kids like Raven. And so I think that that's the piece to me that matters the most.
And Teryn, I actually want to invite you to say a little bit more, because EdLight relies so much on handwriting, right? What does that mean to design a product where like kids at different levels with different abilities can have very different handwriting and very different ways of solving problems, especially math problems, right? Can you talk a little bit more about how EdLight manages that and thinks about designing with accessibility in mind?
Yeah, so we've focused primarily on making sure that all of our like test sets and evaluation sets that are coming through have a 26% or higher population of students with special needs. And so that means we want a purposefully dense amount of students coming in using the platform specifically to help us to understand where that's happening or where it's not. And so I think it's come up in a couple of places. I think the number one fear that I hear from a special education teacher is like, I don't think you could be able to read my kid's handwriting. And I was like, sounds like a future doctor to me. But like, yeah, like that's the kids who we've actually planned for. Those are the students and the work examples that we've actually built as a part of our platform. And so with over 300,000 pieces of student work in building, a solid 25 to 50% of that work is specifically just from classrooms with students with disabilities.
Thank you. And Sarah, I'm also going to go ahead and highlight Quill here too. You guys do so much with your teacher advisory committee, and you've mentioned that you've got thousands of examples where students have actually, teachers have already written out the feedback that would align with a student's particular response. Can you talk a little bit more about like how that kind of diversity or the way that you've structured that teacher advisory council contributes to Quill's ability to serve students?
Absolutely, yes. The Teacher Advisory Council is like the one thing that I think makes Quill really stand out to me and was like an attractive thing about Quill when I thought about where do I want to work next, and I chose it because it's about co-design, exactly what you're talking about. And so I firmly believe in community-based design and designing, with the user in mind. So before we even throw anything at the TAC, we call them, the Teacher Advisory Council, everything that is written for students to consume, the reading passages, as well as the feedback, has been written by humans and been written by former educators, so people who spent 5-10 years in the classroom. And I think that's really important because it's an AI platform. You might think like AI writes the stuff, but we just had our staff retreat and we're like, nope, we're still not doing that. It's not good enough yet. So everything's handwritten by educators. And then they come up with like 50 to 100 things that students might say as an answer, and then what would the corresponding feedback be. And then we have a beta cycle where we release the items to teachers who have signed up to test them with their students, and we collect all the data on all those sessions to see, did the AI perform how we thought? Were there any patterns in students answering outside of what we had guessed? And then we definitely reward the teachers for their time. So we give them, money and gift cards for their time so that it's not just like a one-way transaction. And then we have our TAC split up into different groups. So folks who are more interested in the ELA content versus social studies versus our AI literacy and science content. And we kind of just engage them as super users of Quill. And so then everything's vetted by 600 or more use cases, and then after that, then we go live to production.
Yeah, and what you're saying also reminds me of something Meghan said earlier, which is the counterfactual, really. If you have a human tutor for a student, that is always going to be probably the best and the ideal situation, right? But often students are not sitting in the ideal situation, and when we can design things for that student who is maybe in the furthest from ideal situation, we can boost all of them. I promised our audience at the beginning that they would be able to walk away with some practical advice. And so, to wrap up our session, for all of our folks on this panel, many people in the room are running or funding tutoring programs. If you're a purchasing manager sitting across from the table from a vendor next week, and vendors, this puts you in a funny place, but work with me here. What's the single most important question that they should ask to figure out whether an AI tool will actually support your tutoring goals? And if folks were in the Louisiana session earlier, I think there was a lot of talk also about the role that vendors played. And so my hope is that our advice from our panelists will help folks who are sitting in that next conversation to really think about where AI is playing a role. Why don't we start with Jennie, and then we'll do Meghan, Sarah, and Teryn.
My first question is always, how are you overcoming the 5% problem?
Can you say more?
Yeah, sure. Wanting to understand, one, do they know what the 5% problem is? Two, how have they designed their product, and how are they figuring out opportunities to get either research partnerships or collaborations with their current users in order to gather further data that it's not just serving the top 5% of students, or that it's, the usage expectations that they have of their customer are reasonable and can be attained by a vast majority of students.
I think I would ask, what is the problem that this is solving for? And what is the proof that you have that doing this is better than what we're currently doing?
I love that last question. Mine's similar about the proof. It's like, what concrete evidence do you have that this is worth my student's time or the student's time? And then if we were to drill in a little bit further, I personally want to know, how are you prompting the AI? What's your prompt look like? And we have examples of effective ones and ineffective ones, and I'm happy to talk, about those. And then would you plug in a bunch of data from a school into an evaluator? Would you see what's your feedback like? What is the rate of productive struggle? Have you or are you interested in doing that? Because we're really making those things available, and so we want them to get used.
Mm-hmm.
I'm torn between two. So the first one would be, are you willing to do it for free? I think that all district leaders should be asking that question way more than they are, and they should deserve to get the answer yes. I think we talked a little bit about outcomes-based financing and all of that earlier, but definitely, are you willing to do it for free? And then I think the second one would probably be, what does partnership look like? How in the weeds with us are you about to or not about to be?
And I'm sure that relates to your earlier point about implementation and what does it take to bring folks along. Awesome. Well, we have about 8 minutes left by my clock. We don't have mic runners, but I would love to open it up to questions from the audience. Oh, we do have a mic runner. Bless your soul.
Hi, folks. I'm curious about your point as it pertains to evidence and testing. When we are looking to innovate as quickly as we are, for problems as urgent as they are, sometimes I feel like innovating in education is like drug approval, like FDA process. You come up with something which is a good cure, and then you're stuck. So we've innovated something really cool, but the data that I can share is from 2023. Our product has innovated light years since 2023, but the data is that old. How do you reconcile speed of innovation and quality of innovation with the slowness of research data and balance, thread that needle so that we're able to bring the best innovation to the work while at the same time, get the evidence?
I would love to chime in here. Just from thinking about this, because we have been thinking about this a lot because we're trying to invest in better infrastructures to support more rapid cycle research and evaluation at our foundation. I actually think the level of evidence that you need aligns with the decision that you're going to make, with the decision you're going to make. Are you going to convince a district to spend $30 million scaling the product to every single kid in the district? Then I think you should probably have an RCT with like standardized test score data. Are you going to make a decision to like test another feature or to pilot this in a classroom? Then I think it's fine to have like the internal metrics from the tool that are showing you that this is at least not like harming children, and that they're ideally, again, like starting to come closer to what you would expect from a more traditional model or counterfactual. So I think that it's hard to say it's not like black or white. It really is, what is the decision you're going to make with the evidence that you have?
Jennie, you guys want to chime in too? No? Good? Awesome. I saw another hand somewhere. Maybe I lost it. There we go.
Hi, thank you all for sharing. My question is, when we think about students who are in need of foundational skills, how does explicit and systematic instruction fit into all this? So where does the AI tool draw the line when a student is just struggling? Because we know in some cases productive struggle has been really unproductive for students. So how do we decipher where that line is, or how do you know?
I can chime in here. For our product, it's never meant to replace a teacher or to be a standalone solution. So for Quill, ideal usage is like 15 minutes twice a week, maybe once a week. And so it would like be blended into a teacher's lesson plan where they would open the class, students would engage and grapple a little bit, and then there'd be a thematic tie to what they're reading, and then you would go and open Quill. And then, like was discussed earlier, there's dashboards for teachers to know what to do next and how to intervene, but like always the act of teaching and true assessment and intervention is still mostly in the teacher's hands. That's how ours is approached. I don't know if there are other platforms that are like trying to do AI all day, every day, but I would say like maybe those aren't the most effective.
Yeah, I'd say anything we've implemented has been in alignment with our instructional model. So instruction is still here to stay. It would be, there's, small group instruction happening. We do short cycle efficacy studies on our own. Goodness knows, probably not worthy of this audience, but still internally to say, you know what, it's not working for this 5% of students. And we usually already knew who those students were, and so they are going to stay at the table working with the teacher. The other students will be leveraging the platform. In addition to that, it can be something where it's providing meaningful data to that teacher, but it is not upending the instructional model currently.
Hi, this question is mostly for Teryn, but I think all of you guys can answer. I know that y'all are focused on creating AI tools or tools for teachers to use in the classroom, and Teryn in particular, I'm really interested to know how you guys were able to train the AI to be able to read students' handwriting. I know you talked a little bit about, students who are maybe at a academically not quite there, but I'm just interested in in general about how you guys are training the AI in order to be able to read student responses and then deliver the intervention necessary for teachers to use.
Yeah, so over the past 3 years, we were able to, and I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Hi, nice to meet you. You said Maishka? Okay. So over the past 3 years, we have hired 50 middle school math teachers whose entire job was to look at every single piece of work that got uploaded into EdLight. And similarly to what I think you were naming at Quill, their entire job was to be like, what literally did the kid write? What literally would you say back? And so all of that became our data set. And so every single character that kids write, because I taught kindergarten, y'all. It is it's not always a letter. Sometimes it's a thing that might be a letter if you were talking to the kid. And so like every single piece of work we've been able to put into our data set, we've transcribed it, we've then annotated all of the things that we would want a teacher to say back. And because of that, we've built our entire data set on that. And so it's not like a ChatGPT wraparound or any of the other large language models, because specifically for math, we know that they aren't great at math anyway. And so using our data set, we've kind of built out like a pipeline of models that's job is to think about the pedagogy, to make sure that it's asset framed for kids, all of those different pieces. And so if you take that data set and you feed it through all of those different models, the outcome is what we're able to do in terms of the analysis of the student work. And because we have such a large data set that is available publicly for research as a part of our global commitment, that we really believe that those are the pieces that we've now used to then say, hey, here's the student feedback for this one, but then teachers at any point in time can actually like override that or say like that's not exactly right, and then we use that information in our research partnerships to update as well and to continue to audit and fine tune and all of those different pieces. But I think the like biggest thing if you're trying to solve a problem similarly is like obviously the data set is magical, but really making sure that you have teachers as a part of that conversation, because we were talking about it earlier. The three of us aren't going to look at one piece of student work and all agree. And so you need that tension to exist.
Awesome. Well, let's have a round of applause for our panelists.